Well, welcome everyone. I'm Carmen Mezzera. I'm going to be moderating this session today where we look at how local and global issues connect and how you can bring these kinds of questions to your students in your campuses. We're joined by three amazing speakers. Tripp Pomeroy is the CEO of Cafe Campesino and Sweetwater Organics that makes my favorite cup of coffee in the country. Anuj Sahay is a international trade manager for Fairfax County, Virginia's Trade and Investment Authority. And then Tracy Pintchman is actually one of you. She's a professor and a student advisor working at the Loyola University of Chicago. So we have some wonderful perspectives that we hope to bring to you from all of the different ways that your students can connect local and global issues. As always, if you have any technical issues, we invite you to reach out to the APSIa staff or to put those messages in the chat as we can. And we're also going to invite you in a little bit to put your questions forward, the things you hear from students, the things you're wrestling with, the things you just really want to know while we have our panelists here to join us. And so to get started, the first question I'm going to ask each of you is, in your work, how do local and global issues connect? And Tripp, I want to start with you as our small business owner.
So, I would say we're Georgia's first 100% fair trade organic coffee company, just to kind of frame where I'm coming from. And I would say in my current role, the international connection hits at a bunch of levels. I mean, from obviously universities that host international students, tourism. But my beginning was actually working with landscapers when I was 16, 17 years old. And folks from Central and South America, women and men who came up to find opportunity. And so I think, if you look into the community, you will see people who may not, obvious at first sight, but people from all over the world tend to live in our community. So I think there's the human interactions. There are work and business interactions, and then obviously as a fair trade organic coffee company, it's where do our products come from? Our coffee comes from all around the world, Asia Pacific, Ethiopia, and sub-Saharan Africa, all of Latin America. So I would say there's no shortage of ways to find a connection to the rest of the world, and it's exciting. I think it takes some creativity and some rugged individualism to create the opportunity you want. But it's there.
Anuj, how about in your work? Do you feel like a rugged individualist in your job?
Oh boy. Well, I had always had the opportunity to work in the international sphere. And this is always exciting when I go back to my contacts and say I work for the Fairfax County and represent two markets. They are like, first of all, surprised that we have an international office. And to give you, for most of the people who definitely know Fairfax County, we are one of the diverse county in the United States. Our 30%, 35% of the population is first generation. And we have $135 billion economy. If I put it at a state number, will be if Fairfax would be a state, it would be 42nd state in the United States. I mean, and that part, my primary role is definitely looking after India and Canada. We have 60 plus companies from both the geographies investing in Fairfax. So that perspective, there are a lot of I do feel kind of lost sometimes when it comes in the county level, but I have to backtrack myself and kind of like look at the international sphere. But it's a very interesting nexus for me because that's very on the granular level. It helps me to kind of understand how things actually work. I'm a policy guy from background, but when I come to EDA, it's a very different universe, and it's very interesting to fascinating to work into with.
And Tracy, how have you seen it both connect in your own work as well as for your students?
Sure. Well, Carmen and Brittany, let me take this opportunity to say thank you both for all of the hard work you do, Carmen, especially in spearheading APSIa year after year with your good humor and your energy. I very much appreciated. I think the question is really, where do they not intersect? So both Tripp and Anuj have both already mentioned, for example, the economic entanglements, right? For the local and global economic entanglements. So one of the ways we exploit that in the classroom is to, for example, have students pick an object that they use every day and then to track it out in terms of its global connections. A cup of coffee, a t-shirt, or if they're shopping at Target, doing some research on Target. What is Target's footprint, both locally and globally? How does it affect the countries of origin from which many of its products come? So we try very hard to show students that everything about the local pretty much is connected to the global. So even the people who work right in the landscaping sector. So that would be an opportunity to interview those people to find out where they come from, what their story is in terms of how they arrive at the points to which they arrive in the United States from their points of origin. The global is everywhere. In my own work, I work in South Asia. I've worked less in South Asia in recent years, going actually to India and doing field research. But I've been researching a community here in the United States. It's the topic of a book that'll be coming out later this year, and looking at transnational connections. So religion, markets, climate, the local is intricately connected to the global on every level. My job as an educator is to find ways to help students and to help other researchers see those connections between the local and the global.
That's excellent. And to build on that a little bit, can you talk about how you, along your career journey, have ended up working in these issues and maybe some key highlights along your path, Tracy?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, I'm a South Asianist by training, so I started going to India in the 1980s. I'm dating myself. Okay, so it was a very different South Asia back then. It was before the opening of the economy in 1993, and I was a graduate student when I first went there for a year to do language work. And over the years, I've seen the whole field shift from being a field of study that was very much focused in South Asia to having a much more global focus, because of course there are Indian and Hindu communities everywhere. I tend to work with the Hindu community, it's just my area of specialization. And so increasingly people have gotten interested in what is usually called the diaspora. I've actually challenged some of the use of that term, but communities outside of India. So you don't have to go far in the United States to be deeply immersed in Indian culture. Which is something that I've tried actually to introduce my students to. And of course, I'm in the Chicago area, so it's easy to do that for me. I think it's harder in other places, but it's there. Storefront kinds of temples, storefront mosques. So there are lots of ways in which students can encounter the global on a local scale.
Seems only right, Anuj, that we would turn next to you as someone who has very much lived this local global connection in your professional life and your educational life.
Boy, after Tracy, it's hard to kind of follow that. Yes, I think to pick I would say to pick, yes, currently India landscape is changing, and given whatever is going around, and as country kind of pick up their own speed in the economic and the trade perspective, they have their own strength, which comes up in the global arena. What that said, then definitely I would say, there are a lot of other ways where you can actually work in the United States within a diaspora which you're interested in. So, for example, I would say in Northern Virginia, we have international diaspora from almost all the countries, and you kind of just pick up, and then from a company perspective, you look at the industry which is growing in the country, which is highly in demand, and obviously you have a lot of sectors just coming up between two countries. So I would say India and US, for example, energy is there, IT is there. So you look at that sector and then you kind of backtrack where you can have both aspects, understanding the culture and understanding the business narrative between two countries, I would say.
Anuj, am I right? You were an international student who came to the United States and was able to really live those pieces of connection. Tripp, how about you? You talked about when you were 17. How about between that brief period between then and now?
Yeah, right. Well, no, I mean, it's interesting. I can relate very much to the work that this group does because I benefited from support from my family, from my university, from my graduate school, you know, stepping stones along the way. So when I was young, I knew that I wanted to work internationally. And, you know, I learned good work ethic from the individuals who I worked with. And in the course of doing that, came to the conclusion that I would have no business working in development unless I actually knew how to do something and could add value. And so what I set about doing was working and the landscape. So, you know, I'll just give my little kind of career path because I think it's relevant. You know, I graduated from college with a degree in political science, knew I wanted to get into international work and international development in particular, and hadn't, you know, where do you start when you're 22, right? And so after 6 months in a mutual fund company, I said, wow, this is not going to work. And I actually took a volunteer position with Habitat for Humanity International in Americus, Georgia, which is where my company is based now. And I got this job to do PR for the 1990 Jimmy Carter Work Project. Didn't know what I was doing, but figured it out and took it. And it really, it helped me immensely. Got to work in Tijuana. In college, I took advantage of study abroad programs, went to Poland, went to Jamaica, and got exposed that way and kind of saw the global, you know, two very differing perspectives on national economy and national approach to economy. But then jumping back forward to graduate school, I studied international development, but I was landscaping during the day. And so I was, you know, in classes at night, and I was learning how to do cross-cultural communication. I was learning, you know, Tracy, I did an ethnographic study of a dozen people who came up and what the, you know, what this whole conversation is about. And so I took opportunities when they came, even if they were high risk, including moving to Paraguay to open a marketing office for a small company. After I got through graduate school. And so, you know, kind of back to the rugged individualism or whatever you want to call it, right? I mean, there's being aware that it's everywhere, and it's being willing to ask if there are opportunities to do creative things as you build your career and build your education. So I think awareness, I think relationships, and adding value are the three things that I've learned along the way are pretty core elements of you know, creating opportunity. I feel strongly about that, and I preach that to my kids.
And can you tell when? Oh, please, Tracy, go ahead.
I was just going to add a point of follow-up. Thank you. It's very interesting for me to be part of this conversation because I've been an academic my whole life. I've been in the academic world for 60 years. But when I teach students, most of our students are not going to be college professors. And so economic sphere, marketing, and production of products, obviously that's a sphere of tremendous contact between the local and the global, which is what got me started in doing this particular kind of exercise with students. It was the brother of my Hindi teacher. I studied Hindi for a year in North India, and his brother lives in Rajasthan. And you know, I became sort of part of their extended family. The brother in Rajasthan runs a factory where he employs local labor, and they used to produce Christmas products for Crate and Barrel. From this very traditional Hindu family in a desert city in North India, which is what got me interested in how can I turn that into a learning exercise, right? And culturally, right? So caste issues in Silicon Valley in the last 20 years have become an issue. Caste is not a Hindu phenomenon, it's an Indian phenomenon. So what happens when you have diaspora traditions coming into California, with the rise of IT, how does that affect notions of hierarchy? So these are other ways in which the kind of movement of people and movement of products is educational for the students in seeing the global in the local where they might not have seen it before. The IT community needs to be aware, for example, of social hierarchies that exist in other parts of the world, in China and India, as you have immigrants moving into Silicon Valley.
I love that as a case also for students in studying IT as well as studying political science to do those cross-cultural communications classes that Tripp talked about and to think about their language skills. On the question of skills, actually, for each of you, I'm curious, what skills do you think students need to be successful at organizations like yours, as well as at this intersection of local and global? And Anuj, I'm going to start with you, just to get your opinion on this.
Thanks, Carmen. See, I'll backtrack myself. So I moved to the United States in 2018. My last job at the French embassy in India was literally sitting next to the sitting president of France. When I moved to the United States, my first job was to slap pizzas for Pizza Hut. So when you work in international relations that much, you need to understand two things. First, what's the tangible hard skill you're bringing to the table where the stakes are high? What's our intangible skill which you bring? Now, if you're looking at DC area, you have Georgetown, you have so many universities where first generation Americans, where you have students graduating at a very high level who has that exposure. Me as an international person who walked in the door, I was like, well, what I'm bringing to the table. So moving forward in Michigan, what I learned was writing is my skill. If you can put your thought in paper, you would be able to communicate. If you are able to process that and present in front of your audience, not what you thinking, what your audience want to hear, your job's done. The cultural aspect, I've stayed in 4 countries. When I stayed in 4 countries. I grew up in India, first 18 years. I stayed in Europe for 10 years all by myself, backpacking. And then I moved to the United States. I speak 5 languages, none of them of use. The only language of use is English. The reason why my audience does not understand any other English. So I think when it comes to international relations in economic development, it's a very different ball game to understand and to actually being someone who is open to learn. Don't be a slacker and never cut corners. End of the story. That's what I would say.
I couldn't agree more on the not being a slacker and also thinking about even students, what they can contribute, right? Students often write themselves out to say, oh, I'm just a student, but there's so much they can bring to the table, even if it's just energy or an extra pair of hands. Maybe some of them are also chinqualingual. And so being able to go through that. Tripp, how about you? What skills would you recommend students need in your industry and beyond?
Yeah, well, I thought that was really 100% agree. So just to make sure I'm talking about the skills, right? And I just want to make one observation. We talk about, business and economy, but our business is actually part of a social movement. And just to kind of make clear that there's a huge web of opportunity through a business like ours, but our business is a founding member of something called Cooperative Coffees, which is 22 roasters from the Yukon down to Florida. And we're all allied to buy coffee cooperatively from small-scale farmer organizations. And so there's all these little offshoots of opportunities that could be sustainability related, specifically soil health, all the way through to the coffee that we buy. So I just wanted to add that. But Anuj, I agree, no slacking. And here's the list I have that I have said ad nauseum to my children, my young adult children. It's definitely don't slack, don't cut corners. Couple things. You got to know how to do a spreadsheet. Like everybody needs to know how to use Excel. That is just not negotiable. Everybody needs to be able to think before they compose an email and compose a concise, well thought out, brief message, keeping in mind that somebody has to read this among 1,000 emails. And I know I'm going into the details, but this is true. A language is good. Cultural receptivity is critical. But being able to build relationships, because relationships give access to networks and create opportunity. And then hard work ethic and knowing that first and foremost, you have to add value and you have to put in the time and be open to making mistakes. But those are what we look for. And the only thing I'll say is often some of the best people we hire, at least for a coffee house environment, are people, so for our roastery, are people who've been in food service. People who have waited tables generally know how to move and get stuff done. That's a top candidate, as well as people who come from families that have migrated to the States, who come with just beautiful work ethic and family values seem to be kind of our two pools of most reliable, long-term staff.
That's great. And we heard a lot of this in some earlier sessions too, particularly about the critical nature of writing and that underline under concise. I know that sometimes students are excelling in the writing of large 80-page papers that go into great detail. And I often stress to them how you need to take all of that same content and give it to me in a page and a half at most, so that I have the chance to understand it and process it. Now, Tracy, I'm sure you don't ever assign an 80-page paper. No, not at all. But what skills do you see as valuable as your students go out into the world?
So as I'm listening to Tripp and Anuj talk, I'm thinking, what do I do to produce the kind of student that they might be interested in hiring? And I think the set of best practices we have works toward that. I do a meeting every fall with our incoming students, and returning students are also welcome to come, where I talk about what are the best practices in the global studies major. And one of them is just do well in college, right? I don't care if your assignment's boring. I don't care if you don't feel like studying, do well in all of your classes. That signals work ethic, right? So that obviously is one. Learning a foreign language is a best practice. We require foreign language skill, but I tell students, don't just do the minimum, go above and beyond. Studying abroad, really immersing yourself in a foreign culture. So that shows initiative. It shows the ability to get out of yourself and to immerse yourself in an environment that can be difficult and to adapt to that sort of environment. And then doing an internship is also a best practice for us. So that getting some kind of work experience, even if you hate your internship, it's great work. It's still a really valuable thing to know about yourself, that this is not the kind of work you want to do. This is the kind of work you want to do. And just having some kind of internship signals that you have some work experience, you know how to take direction, you know how to deal with frustrations in the workplace and so on. And then the last best practice, well, there are two more. One of them is a research project, especially for those going on in graduate school. That's something that, that we also recommend. But I always tell students, do a cluster of courses in something applied. So it could be learning how Excel, right? So learning some basic computer skills, learning how to design a website. It could be 3 courses in marketing. So something applied that you can bring to the table that kind of distinguishes you from the sea of other people with international affairs, international relations, global studies kinds of degrees. Having those real tangible skills is what helped my daughter. My son is an engineer. I didn't worry about him, but my daughter majored in environment and public health, kind of international. And I told her to do something applied, and she did. She did geographical information science, and her jobs that's how she's gotten her jobs, was through that combination of the knowledge plus the applied skills.
I love that. And I invite again our colleagues, if you have questions or things that students ask you, now is a great time to put those in the chat or to raise your hand. I want to build a little bit more on that point about relationships. Sometimes students can't study abroad, or they are able to go for a different period of time. Are there ways to build those relationships in their communities that haven't come up yet? We talked about service jobs, we talked about internships. One tip I often give to students is if they have language skills, often hospitals or police forces are very hungry for folks with those language skills. The census, the public health office that's trying to reach different communities. Are there ways that students can find the global in their local community and start to practice those relationship building skills? Tracy, you're nodding, so I'm going to start with you.
Sure, yes. That's something I talk about with my students all the time. We do not require study abroad. Our student population is one that is not necessarily a wealthy student population. And so many students simply don't have the funds, or they have a job at home or family obligations, so they can't go study abroad. And so we have volunteer opportunities. We have language exchange programs where you can tutor somebody in a foreign country on Zoom in English, and they can then help you with your language skills, and lots of volunteer opportunities. Tutoring, we have Centro Romero, which is up the street from us, for students with Spanish language skills who can tutor Spanish-speaking immigrant children after school hours, and so help them with their subjects. So there are all kinds of ways in which students pretty much anywhere can get those kinds of connections. Now, they're not the high-level business connections that are going to get them a high-level job, but they're ways to practice their cultural skills and their communication skills.
Sure,
sorry, that's I said the high-level ones. There's another way to do that I can talk about as well after, but I'll let the other two panelists have a go.
Tripp, what do you think? Is Tracy right? Is that not how to get the big job?
I think there's no shortage of avenues. I mean, there's everything from Toastmasters, which can be just in terms of learning the skills of speaking in front of other people and meeting retired professionals, which was something I did when I had lived in Florida. And all these, people who had lived overseas, people who had never left the United States, but learning how to gain confidence and speak publicly, which I think is a foundational element. I think a lot of young people lack the confidence, and they lack the confidence oftentimes because they don't have the opportunity and the encouragement. Toastmasters is great as an example. But then, there's everything that Tracy just said, I agree with. I think that there are, depending on what city you're in, if you're, there's chambers of commerce. There's keeping your eye out for cultural events. It's and it doesn't all have to be like hard skill-based, career relevant, because there's two things that I think need to happen. One is you're building your confidence and awareness to put your hand out and to have eye contact and to be able to carry on a meaningful conversation with somebody, which in turn then you never know where the opportunity is going to come from. My assignment to Paraguay came at a barbecue after I'd gotten my degree, and it was a casual conversation with somebody who had been working in Paraguay. And so I think that building the skills, the interpersonal skills and the communication skills and the self-confidence, and then identifying opportunities. Social is just often just as good as business.
Anuj, how about you?
As Tripp and Tracy mentioned, definitely those avenues are yet to be explored. But I would say we live in a connected world, a digital world right now, like pandemic, something which has taught us like how connected we could be. So I think it will be the drive of your initial person as well, like how much you would like to learn and how much you would like to go find things. Everything is up in the ether. You can find it. All you need to do is go on Google. Google is the best friend. I mean, there are programs, there are improv activities, which I go sometimes. There are book clubs. Go join a book club. I mean, it's you guys are in your phase, which I feel like I could go back and be the same guy. But when you're in college, when you're in high school, you have the best opportunity to go and tap into resources what a state level offers. You don't have to go to federal level, the state level, the county level has offered. Like, and as everything is aware, and you can find that on internet, there are a lot of immigrant population who comes in and you have access to that centers who support them. So go volunteer, as Tripp mentioned, as Tracy mentioned, go build up that skill set by your own with your own drive and see where you can plug in. You never know. Someone could be tapping on your shoulder and asking you to do a job somewhere else in the world.
If I could
I
just
love-
follow up to
yeah.
that and say one thing, Carmen, one of the things I forgot to mention, just as a follow-up to what Anuj just said, informational interviews, I encourage students, they hate doing them. But find somebody whose job you want and send them an email and say, hey, you're my idol. Could I just talk to you 10 minutes just to find out how you got where you are? Most of the time people will say fine. People like to be flattered. I have a script that I give to students. And so it's an opportunity for you to interview somebody to find out about who they are, to find out about what kinds of skills are being sought in that field. And it's also now somebody you know. So the next time they have an internship opportunity or an entry-level job opportunity, you might come to mind. So even though students really hate doing that and they think, why would anybody want to talk to me? I'm just a college student. Actually, they can be extremely helpful. Something like 1 every 20 informational interviews leads to a job offer. I don't quote me on that. That statistic might not be exactly correct, but it's something around that.
That, if I could add one thing, Tracy, that's a good point. I think when I look back, many of my bosses became mentors and informal mentors, and I would say that's another element, another tool that students should be aware of, is to look at their bosses, kind of in line with what you're saying, Tracy. You know, the idea of build a relationship with your boss, share what, even if you're flipping burgers, making pizzas, talk with your boss, share what you're doing. And I think a lot of bosses, you know, a lot of people in upper management, supervision want to support and want to mentor. And then there are formal mentoring programs that are available. And I'd say mentors are primarily responsible for really important milestones in my career development. It's important.
And if I'll just add to that is like, don't be afraid. The worst you're gonna get is no answer.
Right.
But at least you just listen, imposter syndrome, I still have it.
Mm.
Do I belong in the room? I still have it. I've sat with the president, I've sat with prime ministers, and I'm like, well, what am I doing here? I still have it in me, and it will always be there. And you learn from your mistakes, then you move on. But make sure you learn from your mistakes. Don't just ignore it.
And are there ways, that people have approached you looking for mentorship, looking for an informational interview, that maybe were a little more misguided and you would suggest students avoid? Or are there good ways they can approach you for that internship, or not that internship, that informational interview or the mentorship, things you'd like to see?
I think if people would have been honest about, hey, how is it?
I fear we might have just lost him. So Tripp, I'm going to put the same question to you. Ways you like to be approached?
Well, you know, I've had some opportunities recently to start. I've been asked to kind of in an indirect way to mentor some of the folks who work for us, and I think it all comes back to good, clear communication skills and engaging with the people you work with and building relationships there, which invariably, in my experience, lead to broaching subjects. So yeah, it's happening in our company, and not just with me, but with my business partner. We have some folks who are coming to us asking for advice and sincerity. self-confidence and sincerity. And these are often the hardest working people in our company. Yeah, I don't have, communication skills and confidence.
And Tripp, you're also involved in some of the other social entrepreneurship and fair trade networks as well, and those kinds of pieces too, in terms of folks coming to you for advice on how they get started or how they grow and are authentic in those relationships with coffee farmers. And because so much of it can be extractive unless you're really thoughtful about it. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Anuj, I
Sorry
think you're
about
back.
that.
Are we back? Hello.
We live in the world where depend on everything on charging a laptop, which obviously I forget every time. I got the word authentic from Tripp, and that's if people would have been much more authentic to me, say that, hey, I would like to work in this organization. Could you give me an insight of how is it on your day-to-day life? I think you guys are with professors who have and I love my professors. Honestly, one of the greatest mentors I've ever had, and I'm still in touch with them. I reach out to them and say, hey, what kind of question should I ask? Or do your research about what should I ask? Like, for example, if I would like to work in an organization, go ahead and look there, do the legwork of charting out the questions which you want to ask, look at the positions which you want to do, and what do you want to do, and then ask relevant questions. Make sure you do not waste someone's time. That's very, very critical. I cannot emphasize how important it is. If somebody's giving your time, his time or her time to you, make sure you use every single minute of it. That will be very helpful. So I think if somebody would have been done more, do much more research by yourself, and then go and approach your interviewer or your mentor, whomever you would like to have ask questions to.
Absolutely. And the other complement to that I often find is, tell me why you want to talk to me, not just anybody. Like, is there something about my background or what I can share that you're actually after, not just ticking the box to make your professor happy, which is obviously a real thing too, or just oftentimes the real ask is, can I have a job? Not, can I learn from you, or do you have any experience? And most of the time I can't give you a job, but maybe I could give you an introduction or some insight or some experience that was useful in my journey that's also helpful in yours.
And if I may add, like, if people are looking for jobs, I'm happy to drop in the chat we have a website, and we have 100,000 jobs available. Now, we on the county side, we do run fairs, we do run career fairs where it's kind of plugged in, but this job website will actually give you information on the jobs open in the county, so you can find jobs from any places or whatever career field that you would like to do. But if you would like to connect, feel free to email me, and I'll see if we can help you. Then definitely get something rolling for you guys.
And is that distinct to Fairfax County, or is that something that folks could find, that there are local job boards and fairs going on across the country?
So it's work in Northern Virginia, so all the jobs open in the Northern Virginia area, which also doesn't mean, like, if you look for I would say the DMV area, definitely the jobs available. You find the company, you type in the name of the company. The platform is self-explanatory. It's a very easy one to go navigate that. So it's basically work in Northern Virginia. However, anybody staying anywhere in the world can actually access this portal.
And I know lots of other states have similar opportunities too. Colorado, North Carolina, they all have these ways. And students, again, may not think of that as a chance to do global issues or use their political science degree, but there's actually a lot of that kind of work that happens navigating regulatory issues or working with local communities. So lots of good ways. And local job fairs at the city and the county and the state level are sometimes opportunities that get far less traction and far fewer applications. So students compete in a smaller pool than the USA Jobs big federal level opportunities. We're almost at time, but so I again invite all of our colleagues. I see a few questions in the chat or comments about, what do you do when you don't receive any response? You've tried to reach out, you've tried to do the informational interview, and nobody wrote back. And as you're on my screen, any advice for folks who did what we asked and then it didn't pan out?
Just don't give up. Ping him again. Be that ardent fella. Don't irritate them. But listen, there's a way. I personally believe in giving back to the community, and that's something very beautiful because Michigan gave me that opportunity. I'm part of the alumni. So and obviously, dependent person to person, most of the people, as Carmen and Tracy and Tripp has mentioned in the very beginning of the call, people would respond maybe late, but there are authentic people who would respond to you, but just make sure don't waste their time.
Yeah. And to this point of, what do you do when the 2 or 3 or maybe one entity you're approaching doesn't respond? I've had this conversation with more than a couple of people in the job pool. Well, it's a lot like sales. If you want to walk away with 5 opportunities, you better have 50 in the pipeline. That's number one. Is if you really do, and it's hard, and my heart goes out because there's this kind of it's hard to stand out. And then the other two, so one, fill your pipeline with lots of opportunities. Number 2 is find a way to face. Do what you got to do. Send a handwritten note. I swear, do something creative that differentiates you, because you really are. I mean, especially with AI, there's a lot of kind of first level screening that is just going to strip out who you really are. And so that, find creative ways. Send a creative email to the CEO. You never know. But it is a numbers game. And like 3 or 4 opportunities in the pipeline, I'm not going to do it.
Tracy, how about you? Things you say or believe with students?
Sure, yeah. Well, it's the old adage, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? So I tell students to be persistent, but not annoying. So there is a fine line between those two things, especially when it comes to informational interviews. Usually students will get positive responses to those, but I tell them if 3 is the magic number, if the 3rd try, there's no response, you need to move on. You need to give up on that particular opportunity and find somebody else to talk to. In terms of the approach, I always tell students, so Carmen, you mentioned this, Anuj, don't go in and ask for a job. First of all, if you're going for an informational interview, you're there to ask them information. Start by asking about themselves. Everybody loves to talk about themselves, right? We're all egotists at heart. So I have a whole set of questions that I give them that are kind of stock ones that they can mix up. But the first 5 are really questions about the person, how they got to where they were, what their frustrations are, what their day-to-day life is like in the job, what they like, what they don't like. And then switch to a broader questioning about, well, what kinds of skills now would it take? What are you looking for in people you hire? They never ask directly for a job unless it's a job interview, obviously. But to talk around that, to get to know the person and to listen, the skill of listening and actually being interested in that person and what they have to say, not just reading from a list, but actually hearing and responding to what they say, that establishes that relationship. And then following up with a thank you note. And then down the line, when you're graduating, send them, I hope you remember we had this interview. I'm at the point of graduation. If you know of any jobs in the area, here's my resume. Please feel free. And you do that 100 times. So the numbers game, Tripp is absolutely right. You're going to get screened out, okay, by AI. That happens. It's happened to my own kids, and my adult children. So cast the net widely, but you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So take them. And you have to go forward with confidence even when you don't feel it, and be engaged and truly interested in the people that you're talking to.
I love that. And hopefully advisors have that great advice. And now they can say, no, I was on this panel and people said, you have to try and you have to be authentic. And I always liken it to dating, right? You don't ask someone to marry you on the first date. You have to get to know them a little bit and then work your way towards more serious investments, but you have to mean it at the same time. My very last question for all of you, and then I do invite our attendees. Don't forget, we're going to be talking tomorrow about some of the ways that APSIa and the PISA network can hopefully make your life a little easier and use some of the practical advice like you've heard here today about questions you can ask students and opportunities you can remind them of to bring more of this to your campus. But my last question for all three of you is, with all of the ways that students can put their desire to be a part of positive change or leave the world better than they found it as part of their career, why should they choose something like international affairs and public service? Tripp, you're on my screen, so I'm going to start with you.
Wow, that's a big question. I need to think about that for a second. Why should they? Because I'm not sure everybody should. I think people who are really interested in the outside world, who have a passion for it, those are the people who should pursue opportunities to connect. Because I think it takes a little more effort. Okay, so here's why. If you're really interested in connecting with the outside world and you want to make a difference, you need to be passionate to eventually land that role, right? But the rewards are so immense. Cross-cultural. I mean, my business partner and I still look at each other. We're part of a co-op. We go meet with coffee farmers. We have these great 18 people who work in our roasting facility, and great people. And we still look at each other 20, 25 years later and say, we still get paid to do this. And that's the reward. Like, hopefully you'll feel that way. And you may not get rich, but you'll be involved with people and in work, livelihood, meaningful livelihood. And relationship. And my last thing would be just to say, apart from thanking you, Carmen and Brittany and Anuj and Tracy and all of you for being here, is that as my kids are out of college and as I am in my 20th year with Cafe Campesino, the most satisfying thing about my work is working with people, being part of a community. That is it's more than the icing on the cake. That's the cake, is being connected with people and working collaboratively and cooperatively. And the international environment just offers so many opportunities.
I think that's something students really hunger for these days, is that connectivity and that contribution. Anuj, you're smiling. How about you?
Yeah, it reminded me, I would say international affairs, right now, you guys are college students, you do have the appetite to just go out and about and do your things. Because once you hit a professional level where you have to kind of drill down back to experience, there's something somewhere in the world going on right now which we can definitely trickle your brain. And honestly, when I reflect back, when I work on India right now, I work in Canada, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't even know about these things. So I think, and working in international affairs is also like learning another language. And if you go on the research and do part of it, like how mentally you can grow, if you learn a computer language and versus a language, like a international language, when you learn an international language, your 5 senses in your brain is activated. You learn a computer language and then with 3 activated. So you can see the amount, you will never get old in a way that your brain's going to keep ticking. But watch out what you ask for, because you might digest more than you can. You'll be like, what I did to myself. But I would say it's always rewarding. And Tripp has mentioned, I work on the county level right now. I service my, the Indian and the Canadian community. And when I do that, I'm able to relate personally with them. I'm able to understand what they kind of put my foot in their shoes and understand where the pain point, what I can do. Not sure I'll be able to solve a problem, but probably I will be able to kind of empathize with them. But then again, international relation is such an open area. You need to be really careful, or you're gonna end up in deep waters with no floaters on.
I love that. For students who have that, call it a lifelong learning, for students who want to build relationships, evidently for students who are wanting to be young forever. I like that very much. That's a great avenue, a sales pitch too. Tracy, how about you? Why should advisors counsel students to come into this space?
They should do it because it suits them. You know, that's when students always come to my office saying, I've taken these classes in global studies and I really want to switch. My parents want me to be a doctor. I really want to switch from biology to global studies. What can I do with a global studies major? And my answer is, you can do anything with the global studies major. You can be a surgeon if you want to be a surgeon. You can be CEO president. So who are you? I think the hardest thing for students to figure out at age 19, 20, 21 is who they are and what they want to do with the rest of their lives. They've never had a career. They don't really know what different kinds of careers entail. But I just say, follow your interests, follow your excitement. So if this is something that excites you, take the classes that excite you, do the study abroad, do the best practices, right? So you're setting yourself up from success and do well in everything you do. And then whatever path you start on right after college, it will take you somewhere you probably never could have anticipated. So you should go into this area if it suits you, if it excites you, if it's something that makes you want to get up, to open the books, to study, to get up every day, and paths will open up for you. It may not be immediate. There will be frustrations along the way. This is not an accounting, and it's not like accounting where you take a test, you become an accountant or a nurse. It's going to be a much more zigzaggy path. But if you're excited and you persevere, you can make a good life.
I love that. And particularly those questions that advisors can say to students. What gets you excited? What kind of zigs and zags are you hoping? How do you want to be a lifelong learner? Do you want to have a job based in relationships? Those are such great questions that advisors can put to their students long before, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or exactly what job do you want to have? Because I've been at this too, and I couldn't tell you what I want to be when I grow up either. So I want to say thank you to our panelists, to our attendees. Please don't leave yet. We have a very, very brief poll to let us know how we did that I'm going to invite Brittany to activate. And please don't forget to come by tomorrow as well. We have one more session to share with you. Recordings like this will also be available on the APSIa YouTube page, so you can revisit all of that great advice and those questions that you got. And we're hopefully taking furious notes on, as well as those key skills: writing, relationship building, communication, being of service, not feeling like, oh, my pizza slinging job is not going to prepare me for anything. Yes, it absolutely is that training in responsiveness and detail management and customer service that employers value up and down the chain. I said this in our last session. My conversations with the intelligence community are often about how they want people with baseline customer service skills, because that's what they do. That's the heart of their job. So all of that is relevant and things that your students can nurture just right around their campus and in their local communities, whether it's with the private sector, community service groups, on campus through their coursework, like Tracy talked about. Lots of great ways for your students to do this. And we are always here to be of assistance to make your lift a little easier as you think through these things. So thanks to all of our attendees. Thank you to our panelists. We're so grateful for your time. And we look forward to seeing our attendees tomorrow and our alum and speakers in other contexts. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Cameron.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Nice
Thank
meeting
you
you all.
all.